So I literally just walked in the door from my day job, but Twitter has me so annoyed right now with just people talking out of their ass about stuff they don't really understand, because not a lot of us understand it. I would say a majority of us don't understand it. But somehow, some way, gaming has gotten away from actual video games, and now it's about specs. And that's all anyone cares about, specs and teraflops and what kind of architecture you got. And maybe I'm just a different breed because, I come from a generation where I saw the rise of video games from the NES to present day. So I saw during the 16-bit era how the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo, although both were 16-bit systems, were completely different in terms of gameplay experiences. Look at the Disney lineup of games. Each Disney game, for the most part, was catered to that system and played with those system strengths, and a lot of times the Genesis version was a little bit more better than the Super Nintendo version, or vice versa. A game like Aladdin, I liked it better on the Genesis. That's just me. And it was really interesting because at that time you also had more powerful systems coming out. You had systems like the 3DO that entered the market that was a CD-based system that touted itself as a 32-bit system. So you would think that you would get double the graphics and double the gameplay experience, but in actuality, you got CD quality music, you got a little bump in graphics, and you got a lot of full motion video. And full motion video to me is interesting because that's kind of the cinematic gameplay experience of the modern era. Look at a game like The Order 1866. That's essentially a modern day full motion video game where it has an emphasis on a cinematic experience. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but more and more cinematic experiences seem to be coming along, and I don't really care for them because I didn't really care for full motion games. But I'm getting a little bit off course. So let's talk about specs, because really, you also have to throw into the equation the Atari Jaguar that came along during that time. And don't you remember the whole ad campaign, Do the Math? And it had 64 bits, and technically it did have 64 bits, but of course it was not a 64-bit capable system. Most of the games looked like Super Nintendo or Genesis games. So once again, you have a 16-bit system versus a 64-bit system, but they both look the same. So are specs really that important? Now, of course, things got a little bit different during the CD era. When you had the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation 2, they were both 32-bit systems. But once again, the Saturn was far superior at 2D games, and the PlayStation was far superior at 3D games. And then, of course, you have the N64, which was twice the power of a 32-bit system, yet still had limitations. Sure, games could look better. A game like Super Mario 64 or The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time more than likely would look way better on the N64 than on the PlayStation 1, but you have cartridges, so you're sacrificing that CD quality music and full motion video. And there were some very impressive PlayStation titles graphically and Saturn. But those were weaker systems. And then of course you had the GameCube and PlayStation 2 era, and everything was just pretty much the same. You also had the Dreamcast. The Dreamcast held its own, but you just sort of had everything was the same across the board. The PlayStation 2 was the weakest of the three consoles, yet it sold the most because it had a DVD drive. And you're probably wondering what I'm getting at. Well, the Wii kind of screwed things up, I'll admit that, because Nintendo decided that they were leaving the power race because it really wasn't working for them. As awesome as the GameCube was, it really wasn't working out. They were in third place, almost tied with the Xbox, but still, they were in third place and they didn't like that, so they went a different route. And today we're at the present day. You have systems like the PlayStation 4, the Xbox One, the PS4 Pro, the Xbox One Type S, the PlayStation 4 Super Pro, the Xbox One Scorpio, and along comes the Nintendo Switch. And if you know, recently I decided that I'm kind of cool with the Switch. At first I wasn't, I didn't like what it brought to the table. I wanted a powerful system from Nintendo, but now I've kind of come to like the idea. And today, some Nintendo Switch specs were supposedly released, and it's specs. So everyone's losing their mind because on paper, this system looks substantially weaker than something like the PlayStation 4. And I want to know when we started as gamers, started to play specs as opposed to games. I'm not giving Nintendo a pass on this. I'm just saying, what games have we seen from the Switch besides The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild? You saw a little trinket of Skyrim and NBA 2K, but that was it, and that Mario game, but really that was it. That was all you saw was Breath of the Wild, and that's all we've seen on a grand stage. So we don't know the games of the Switch, yet we're willing to write the system off because of the perceived notion that it might not be powerful enough. but yet it's running Skyrim remastered and it's fully capable of running the Unreal 4 engine. So does that necessarily mean that the PlayStation 4 is the better system? Does that really mean anything? I don't think so, because when you have to look at specs, let's take a look at the PlayStation brand itself. I own a PlayStation 4. There's some solid titles for it. I do get a good time out of it, but mostly I just use it for the WWE Network and of course Netflix. A game like Mad Max has been taking up a lot of my time. Amazing game. If you have not played Mad Max, you should definitely pick up Mad Max. One of the best PS4 games and I guess current gen games out there. But you look at something like the PlayStation brand. Let's look at the PlayStation 4. You have a system that has already been superseded with a slightly better version, but this better version, which is stronger spec-wise, has trouble running some current PS4 games as well as the current PS4 is. And that's really interesting to me, because you also have to remember that every PlayStation 4 Pro game must work on the PlayStation 4. So why are we so obsessed all of a sudden with these little incremental upgrades? Why are we so obsessed with all of these specs? It's not about specs, people. It's not about specs, it's about what you do with the specs. Hardware is worthless if you don't have games. Hardware will always be worthless if you don't have games. And to sit there and say, well, Nintendo's screwed because if this system is as weak as some people are perceiving it to be and reports are coming out that they're not going to get third-party support. But are they really screwed? Because the Wii didn't really have traditional third-party support. It got a lot of ports later on, but initially it was new experiences. So maybe Nintendo doesn't necessarily care that much about the multi-plats. Plus, even if they do care about the multi-plats, let's look at some of the projects that are confirmed for the Nintendo Switch. You of course have Sonic 2017, and you also have the Skyrim Remastered. The system plays Unreal 4 engine games right out of the box. So to compare a first generation Switch title to probably, something 3-4 years down the line isn't very fair. And the last thing I want to talk about basically is how power doesn't necessarily mean you're the winner. Because if that was the case, PlayStation would be raking in the dough with the handheld market. The PSP was a phenomenal system. I loved the PSP. There was a time when I played my PSP more than my DS. But I'd always go back to my DS, which was the substantially weaker system. Same thing with the 3DS and the Vita. The Vita never really got its ground. It has gorgeous looking games, but gamers didn't really seem to gravitate towards that. They would always gravitate towards the Nintendo handhelds because that's Nintendo's market. So I just think we as gamers are starting to become programmed to care so much about specs. And it's ridiculous because at the end of the day, specs don't mean shit. It's games. And if the Switch comes out, if they do this presentation and they show off a doo-doo butter games that have no interest to me, I will write off the Switch. That's not a big deal to me. I have no love for a certain I love all hardware companies, but it's not like a girlfriend where like I'm so disappointed that, oh, I don't know what I'm gonna do with myself. I don't know, I still gotta buy it. No, it's as simple as, okay, you know what? I'm gonna pass on this. I'm not gonna pick one up right now. I'll wait till I see more games. That's what I did with the PlayStation 4. That's what I do with all hardware. Isn't that what you should do with hardware? Wait till the games come and games that interest you? I don't know, maybe I'm just rambling on this subject. I really want to know what your guys' thoughts are on this whole spec wars, with the PS4, the PS4 Pro, the Scorpio, the Switch supposedly being underpowered. Do you really care about the specs, or do you care about what they do with the specs and what kind of games we get? Let me know in the comment section down below what you think of everything. If you're one of the new subscribers here, thank you. The channel's been blowing up lately. Be sure to share this video around. Let's get a whole bunch of new subscribers in here as well. If you're new here, leave me a comment, like the video, check out other videos on the channel, subscribe of course, and if you really like me, check out my Patreon. I will catch you guys next time. Later.